Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. This is the Temple Sinai Jewish Book Club meeting. I worked really hard on Rabbi to get him to bring in a fiction writer because, we do a lot of nonfiction and it goes over well. But Danny and I both have our hearts set on fiction. And so we wanted to bring someone. And I thought, who better than the incomparable Pam Jenoff? And as I read you her bio, you will see why I call her incomparable. She's pretty darn impressive. Pam was born in Maryland and raised outside Philadelphia. She attended George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and Cambridge University in England. No big deal, right? Upon receiving her master's in history from Cambridge, she accepted an appointment as special assistant to the Secretary of the Army. The position provided a unique opportunity to witness and participate in operations of the most senior levels of government, including helping the families of the Pan Am Flight 103 victims secure their memorial at Arlington National Cemetery, observing recovery efforts at the site of the Oklahoma City bombing, and attending ceremonies to commemorate the 50th anniversary of World War II at sites such as Bastogne and Corregidor. Following her work at the Pentagon, Pam moved to the State Department. In 1996, she was assigned to the U.S. consulate in Krakow, Poland. It was during this period that Pam developed her expertise in Polish-Jewish relations and the Holocaust. Working on matters such as preservation of Auschwitz and the restitution of Jewish property in Poland, Pam developed close relations with the surviving Jewish community. Pam left the Foreign Service in 1998 to attend law school and graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. She worked for several years as a labor and employment attorney, both at a firm and in-house in Philadelphia, and now teaches law school at Rutgers. She also writes books. She's the New York Times bestselling author of, ready? The Woman with the Blue Star, The Lost Girls of Paris, The Orphan's Tale, The Commandant's Girl, The Diplomat's Wife, The Ambassador's Daughter, The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach, The Winter Guest, The Things We Cherished, Almost Home, and A Hidden Affair. She also authored a short story in the anthology Grand Central, Original Post-War Stories of Love and Reunion. She lives outside Philadelphia with her husband, 3 children, dog, cat, lizard, and bird, which puts my own menagerie to shame.
You know what's funny? I have to interrupt you is that since I wrote that, we have more animals because I think that's 4 or 5. We're up to 6.
Really? What
Yeah,
what have you
dog.
added?
Well, we added a bat mitzvah kitty, so there's 2 cats, and then there was like a rabbit that we rescued from the neighborhood, so we're up to 6.
Nice.
So
Yeah, you've now put my sister, who's a vet, to shame as
you don't
well.
mean to have all these pets; it just keeps happening.
Yeah, she has chickens and roosters though. So, anyway, to begin the Q&A, we're going to be talking to Pam tonight about her history and what brought her here to as an author, how your early years have influenced you as a writer. And then if we have time, we'll get into a little bit of writerly stuff, and then open the floor to questions to everyone if we have time. We do have to end promptly at 8 tonight. So everyone is aware of that. Like if we cut things off quickly, that's why. So my first question for you is, what as a kid, what happened to you? What influenced you as you were a child to go into international relations in college?
That's such an interesting question. I didn't think that's where you were going to start. So it's not really a writerly answer. I mean, I grew up in New Jersey, like a mile from where I am right now. So very small town, very local. Most people where I live did not necessarily leave the state for college, where I went to school at that time. I had gone to a conference in Washington when I was in high school. It no longer exists, but I know a lot of people went. It was called Presidential Classroom, and they would like take you around with all the speakers and everything. And Washington just felt to me like this place where you really felt the ground shake under your feet. And then I also had, a European history teacher who would take us to these conferences, and those people who give you that spark in your life and make you want something kind of bigger. And so I sort of was very drawn to Washington and the international scene for college.
Nice. So you say you're a historian by nature. You said that in an earlier interview. What led you to that realization? You're in DC, everything's moving and shaking around you, and you're like, yeah, no, I'm a historian.
Well, I've never been a career historian, but what happened is I went to GW for undergrad and I received a fellowship to Cambridge. So I got a scholarship to go to Cambridge for 2 years for graduate school. And I thought I was actually going to go do the international affairs thing. But when I got there, they were better at the old stuff. You know what I mean? So for me, so I was like, and I had the chance to stay for a second year if I converted over. So I studied history at Cambridge. And when you study over there, I really didn't have classes or lectures. I mean, it was sort of just me in a dusty library before we had the online catalogs. There were like these big books for the catalogs and everything. And so I wrote a master's in history at Cambridge and honestly, I had a great time. I'm not sure it actually trained me to do all that much. But what that master's degree gave me was the confidence to take on a big project. So if I was going to take on like a 2 year master's thesis that was hundreds of pages long, when I really wanted to get serious with the novel, I said, okay, I've done this. Like I can do this. And it gave me the love of research that I still have.
So do you find that you've done all the research for the books at this point, or do you find new thing? Are you always finding new things to research?
Every book is new research. So, to back up a little bit, what I'm looking for when I go find a book idea, because I go looking for ideas, is I'm looking for like a gasp, like, because if I can find a piece of history that after more than a quarter century of working with the war is so fresh and so untold that it makes me gasp, I'm hopeful I'm onto something about which you will feel the same way. So every time it's a new piece of history. And then the kind of, you know, can I digress and talk about historical research for a second? Is that okay?
Yes, please.
All right. So I was once on a panel with two authors who write modern fiction. And one of them said, yeah, just kind of turn on the computer and start typing. And I was like, you what? Because with historical fiction, there's this whole other job there with the research. And so I always refer to history and historical research. I won't talk about all of this today. We don't have time. But there's really three questions. How do you do the research? How do you weave the research into a story so that you don't get a big dump of history that stops the plot just because I thought it was really interesting? And how do you not mess up the research? Because did anyone hear they made like a mistake in Oppenheimer with the flags, or they left a Poland Springs water bottle in the shot on Game of Thrones? Like that's what it's like for an author trying to not mess up the research. So all of that kind of goes into it.
Yeah, very much. I know authors, historical authors, have been vilified for getting one fact wrong.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
we as readers can be very vicious, but I think, we also need to be mindful of how much work goes into it and that, sometimes things slip through.
Well, it's funny. When I started writing, I was very naive when I wrote my first book, and I felt I was kind of like Tolkien. Like if I could just create a world and it was believable, like people, and it's not like that, right? It's history, and people have a very deeply held need, and rightfully so, for integrity, especially around the kinds of things I write about, right? And so it's very important. So, first of all, I always am very careful to say that I write fiction. It's fiction first, and because I think authors can get into a lot of trouble if they stake too large a claim around what is true in their books. We've seen this a lot of time. So first I do that. And then you try and remain really true to like the dates and the places. And if you are going to deviate on something, you make a conscious decision. I make a conscious decision. And then in the author's note, I will note that so people don't think it was a mistake or that I didn't care. Example, in my latest book, codenamed Sapphire, there's a woman who tries to flee Europe on a ship that is turned away from North America. And we all go, oh, that's the St. Louis. And indeed, it was the St. Louis that, thank you, that inspired this ship. But I didn't call it the St. Louis because I had a mess with the dates. And so I noted that in the author's note.
Right. And like these things, like some readers won't pay any attention, but the ones who do, they get it and they latch on.
And they don't tell me privately anymore. Like it's all out there. And, so I
Right.
remember, I had in 1917 or 1919, I had the month that a Chanel perfume was created. I was like off by a month and I heard about it. So
Wow.
people are really attentive and rightfully
And
so.
and they know their information.
Mhm.
For a lot of people, this is still a lived history.
Yeah.
So So okay, going back in time again, how did law school figure into this trajectory of yours? Like you've had this
Oh.
really like sexy career and you're like, I'm gonna go to law school.
Of the many words I use lovingly to describe my life, maybe not sexy, but let
Sorry.
me put the whole that's okay, but let me put the whole story together because it doesn't make sense in little pieces. So before law school, my whole journey to writing really started around 1996 when I was sent to Krakow as a diplomat for the US State Department. And I really didn't go planning to work on the war. I went to stamp visas and do consular work. But Poland had just come out of a half century of communism, and it had all of these issues from World War II that they'd never been able to resolve about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism and the camps, and they couldn't do it during the communist era because they didn't have free speech. So in the 90s, these issues are sort of like a time capsule sitting there, and Poland and its neighbors wanted to join NATO and the European Union, and everyone was going, well, you still have to deal with your stuff from the war first. So there was like this really interesting moment in time. And I go over to Poland. I'm alone. We don't have cell phones yet. We don't have the internet. And so I'm halfway around the world from my family. And so, being Jewish, I went and found the synagogue. And the elderly surviving community in Krakow really took me in. And so, I went to their shul, which was Orthodox, every Friday. I went to the rabbis for lunch every Saturday. And the US consulate saw that I had a relationship with these people and gave me all the work from like the political stuff to do. So, I spent 2 years on the ground in Poland working on the Holocaust in ways that were like really difficult and also really rewarding. And so it was a very transformative experience. So I'm getting to your law school question, I
Right.
promise. I do this one tour with the State Department. I'm like, okay, I want to go home, but I have no job skills that I can take home with me. And so I went to law school. I came back to the States and I went to law school, but I knew that I was going to like write about those years in Poland and I wanted to write a novel. So that's kind of where law school came in, was sort of after Poland, but before publication.
Wow. Now, did you go to law school intending to be a lawyer, be a teacher? What were you planning to do with a law degree?
I sort of stumble into everything, but I wanted to come back from Poland. The law was a good profession, to get, and I did well in the LSAT. And so I went to law school. I came back, I went to law school, and right after graduation, I started practicing at a large firm in Philadelphia. So I was at the firm for about 5 years, and then I was in-house counsel for about 2.5 years before I moved over to teaching. So I did practice for quite a while, but what happened with the books, since this is kind of how it all ties in, is, I graduate law school, and I've never written a book because I've never finished a book because I just, you get those projects, like you have time, but you can't quite do it. This was me. And so what happened was I started practicing at the firm on September 4th, 2001, which was a
Oh,
Tuesday. And when 9/11 happened, I had this life moment where I said, being an attorney is great. Like, I love this, but I've always wanted to be a novelist. And if I had been a 9/11 victim, this never would have happened. And so this was my aha moment that I had to start writing. And so I took a course, it was a Temple night school in Philly, that was called Write Your Novel This Year. And I started working on Commandant's Girl. But, I was still an attorney at the firm with a ton of student loan debt. So I was not writing full time. I was like writing from 5 to 7 in the morning and then going to the firm.
wow. Actually, I have an editing client who he was a banker and he did the same thing. He'd write from 5 to 7 and then go spend the day
Yep.
working. Yeah,
Yes.
not an easy lifestyle. So you've done a lot of moving around the world and just through education and careers. You say you fell into it, like you fell into things. It wasn't an intentional plotting.
Yes.
How much of that reflects how you approach your books? Are you a plotter or are you a writer by the seat of your pants?
Plotter or pantser. I love
Yeah.
this. So for folks who don't know, plotters are those dear souls who write every line sequentially. They make it look nice. They have an outline, and you can already tell that's not me. I am a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants, which means you turn on the computer, you go blah for months, and all these words just come out. And I see Danny, our creative writing major, nodding and smiling at this. So let me say a few things about that. First of all, being a Pantser is terrible because the editing is dreadful. I don't recommend it. But there's a caveat to my story, which I am a what would you call it? Just like I'm a reformed pantser, and here's why. The Woman with the Blue Star, which was a couple books ago, I pants that book, and I turned in that book, and my editor looked at it and she said, "No," and I'm like, "No, this is like my 11th book. What do you mean no?" Well, the truth was I had written a total stinker of a book. And I had to rewrite 95% of that book in 5 months. I never want to do that again. So now I start with an outline so I don't go way off course.
Wow. How long does it take you to do an outline?
It's not the outline per se, but there's actually this process because I write my books like I don't write them and then submit them. I write a book under contract. And so there's
Right.
this process at the beginning of there's kind of like this meeting of the minds, as how I would describe it, with my editor, my agent, myself, where I have ideas. And, I'm honest, publishing is tough. Lots of times I'm like super excited about an idea and they're not. So I go back to the drawing board a few times until we're all excited about an idea. And then I do kind of a broad brush synopsis. And then maybe I do put together an outline. It could take much longer than I would like. So I remember seeing someone in like May and they were like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Outlining." And then seeing someone in August and I'm like, still out. I'm like, "What did I do for 4 months?" But so it could take a while, but it's nice because once you get going, you're sort of off to the races. It does have a certain appeal.
And are you able at that moment, like as you sit and you're working on the outline, do you pull in your research at that point? Or are you just like, make sure I research this and make sure I research that? And
So it's a very interesting question. I know authors, very well-known authors who you would know, who say they have to research for months ahead of time until the research is like sewn into their skin. And that's not me. I am a contemporaneous researcher. And what I mean by that is I only need so much at the beginning, and then I can kind of research on a need to know basis as I'm writing. This is very useful because research brain and writing brain are different times of the day. So if I don't, I can do them at the same on the same day. It works well.
I understand that.
Yes.
Okay. So do you ever get that old wanderlust that you used to have that fueled you all over the world? Are you happy being settled?
Well, both yes and yes. So
Okay.
I lived in Europe for almost 5 years. I lived all over, all of the place. I was away from my hometown for 10 year, more than 10 years, probably. Like I was away for a really long time and I've been back here for a really long time and I would never move because God bless localgrandparents.com. Like my mom is a mile down the road and I would never leave. I love my kids are like in the same BBYO chapters that I was in. Like they are growing up with the kids of people I knew. I can't walk 3 feet without seeing someone. And I love hometown, but I also, as my kids are getting older, certainly have that wanderlust. And so I went to Cambridge. My mom was never able to visit. And this month is 40 years since I went to Cambridge and I'm taking her. So.
Nice.
And I
Nice.
really, really, can I tell you a travel story? Can I digress? So
Absolutely.
when I told you about that stinker with the woman with the blue star. So when you get bad news like that your book stinks, here's what I do. I shake an angry fist at the sky. I wring my hands for like a solid 5 minutes. And then I think of a line from The Godfather Part Two when Hyman Roth said, "This is the business we have chosen." And you get down to it. So what I did was I said, okay, I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons. When I rewrite this book, I'm going to go to Poland because I hadn't been back in like 17 years. I'm going to go see people, do the research. I booked a really nice mom only trip to Krakow, like the good airfare and the good hotel. I booked it for March 11th of 2020. So as everything starts bubbling up, my publisher said to me, they said, "We don't think you should go to Poland." I said, "I am going to Poland. I'm going to wear one of those masks," because we didn't know what they were talking about. And the flight shut down on March 11th. And thank God they did because I had an emergency appendectomy on March 12th. And so I would have been somewhere in the air over Poland. And so I never got to go back. It is very close to my heart. And I don't get to go for every book, but I deeply owe myself a trip to Poland with whichever children want to come with me at this point.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you want to travel with your kids or do they want to travel with you?
Well, it's so funny. People say, "How have you not taken your children to Europe?" I said, "Well, they don't really like walking around and looking at things, so I'm not. We're still kind of in a water slide phase. I guess they're gonna come to London. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I want to hear about that.
I'll let you know.
Yeah.
I think they'll do great.
Okay, okay, you mentioned the Commandant's Girl.
Uh-huh.
That was your first, right?
Mhm.
Okay, I thought so. But then you went back and wrote The Ambassador's Daughter as a prequel. So, like, I mean, talk a little bit about that, and then I'll get into the next question.
Okay, so here's what happened. And I signed, okay, let me back up. So I have this 9/11 epiphany. I start writing a book and like I finally get an agent and he submits this book and nothing. And so no, it gets rejected by 39 publishers. And so he said, "Well, go write another book. Like it's that easy. And we'll sell that one first." So I was working on another book for about 11 months and it was April 8th of 2005. It was a Friday afternoon. And I'm at the law firm and I see my agent's number on the caller ID and I said, "Are you firing me?" Because this poor guy had not made a dime off of me. And he wasn't firing me. He was actually telling me that one publisher who we didn't even know we're still reading made an offer for Commandant's Girl. So when they made the offer, they say Commandant's Girl and another historical book. It's like a two-book deal. It's a pretty small deal. I didn't know what I was going to do for a second book. So I finished Commandant's Girl and the main character walks up into the sunset. I won't say more than that. One morning, as I'm in my bathroom, like brushing my teeth when all the good ideas happen, another woman from Commandant's Girl pops up and she says, "It's my turn." And I thought, I didn't even know you made it out of the first book. And I didn't really even like her. So it was weird. That became the main character in the sequel to Commandant's Girl, which was the diplomat's wife. Now, I moved around publishers for a while and I wrote some other books, but people were always asking for another book in the Commandant's Girl series. And if I kept going forward in time, we were going to wind up in like the 1970s, which didn't really feel like historical fiction. So I had this idea of a prequel. And I love the Paris Peace Conference era, like Versailles, kind of that Downton Abbey sort of feel. And I thought, well, what if I go back in time and show kind of how the commandant became the commandant? Because he went from this like bright-eyed military officer to kind of, a horrible Nazi. And I thought that's kind of a metaphor for what happened in the world. So let's explore that. That's how I came to write The Ambassador's Daughter a few years later. Prequels are tough because you already know what happens later. So to make it interesting is very tough.
And
Sequels are
you have to make the backstory match what you've already written.
yeah, you're stuck. You're stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, certain things are locked in. So have other characters like reached out and tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Hi, it's my turn"?
So that those three books went together, and I had two other books that go together. They're modern. One's called Almost Home, and one's called A Hidden Affair. They're together, and those are my only books that are sort of paired, if you will. I will tell you, and I'm not even going to say what book because I'm not even doing it yet. Recently, I was in the car with my daughter, and she was like, "Well, what's your most successful book?" And we discussed it, whatever that means. And she said, "Well, why don't you write a sequel to that one?" I was like, "Ooh," so I haven't done it, but never say never.
Right. Do you have a lot of ideas stored up?
I have ideas that have been not accepted or like, whatever that I go back to. So I know some of you may have read The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach, which is my World War II book that's set on the home front. It's Philadelphia and Atlantic City. It's very near and dear to my heart because my mom is from South Philly and my dad was from Atlantic City. So it's a very personal story to me. I had started that when I lived in Poland, all those years ago and never got it off the ground. And so I came back to that book many years after I started it.
Almost like I'm lonely, I'm gonna write about home.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. It's like it was yeah, and yeah, it's a very personal book.
Aw.
Yeah.
I'm curious what like if any of any of you, as in not me and Pam, those of you watching, um, what you think of it, and if you've read any of Pam's other books, how that one compares. So we'll save that question for later. I want to get back to Codename Sapphire
Yes.
because it's your newest book and it came out last year.
Last February. It's about 13 months. Yeah.
Okay. Um, you say you don't write about real people's stories, and yet Codename Sapphire is based on real people.
Okay, so every time someone says based on an actual story, I cross it out and I say inspired by.
Okay,
Because
explain the difference.
okay, so I'm not writing the real person. Like there's so many authors like Marie Benedict do a really good job of like writing about real people in a fictional story. And I don't do that because I don't want to misrepresent nor be constrained by the real details of their lives. So for example, what I'm looking for is the historical inspiration. So I told you I gasp when I find the idea. So for Codename Sapphire, it was learning about this train that was going from Belgium to Auschwitz with Jewish prisoners inside, and about the brave young people who endeavored to stop the train and free them. And that's the true history, but I didn't write the true history because I changed the people. And then there's an escape line going on, and I changed the escape line. And, it's also headed by a woman, but I haven't written about her. So I'm borrowing the idea, but I'm fictionalizing the people because I don't want to take that on. It's too close for me. I mean, I lived among the survivors, but I have not written their stories, even though my books are love songs to those people.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Do you ever like look at, take a step back and look at it and go, okay, this is too close to the real person and I need to back off?
I haven't, because I always disclaim. Now, I will tell you, Almost Home is a modern book, and it has like some apparent parallels to my own life, but not really. So it's about a young woman who went to Cambridge, who was a diplomat, and all these sort of things, except she had a boyfriend found dead in the river, and I did not. But anyhow, when I wrote that book, first of all, people are always trying to find you in your books. So one time my brother called me, he's like, "Do you have a tattoo?" I'm like, I do not have a tattoo. He's like, well, so and so had a tattoo. Or my mom read one of my books and she said, like, you said her mother was a terrible cook. And so, so people take it a little bit like personally, but I will tell you that it's not, you know what I mean? People want to find it in there, kind of the
Yeah.
true history. So it can be personal to me, but not be autobiographical. The
Which is
other
actually,
thing, the other thing I just want to say is that, like, people say, well, which book is your favorite book? Well, the truth is, I don't have favorites. There's like The Firstborn, The Most Successful, all of those things, the New Baby. But I will tell you that these books have been written alongside the chapters of my own life, and so that kind of trickles over. So I know which book I wrote during COVID. I know which was The Woman with the Blue Star. I had baby infant twins when I wrote The Winter Guest, which is about twin sisters. I know which book I was writing when my dad died. Like it's very much alongside my own life.
I think all of anyone who writes has that parallelism. And I think part of the fun really is when you can take that step back and do the creation and make it all pretend or how you want it to be or how it wants to be in its own unique
Yeah.
ecosphere.
Yes.
So does your background and this long experience you have help you create realistic to the period characters?
I mean, it's a combination of experience and research. I mean, what's really embedded in me is like I can feel the streets, It depends where I'm writing about, let's say that. So I'm way more grounded in Poland than Paris, so the research will look different. It's just a function of where I've been and I can't set every book in Krakow, but I love Poland a lot. And so that the place and then with the people and then the research is really interesting because like I know people who go to Italy 4 times for one book. Sounds amazing, but not on my dance card right now. And so there's a lot of ways to get at the authenticity without being there, right? So there are memoirs, correspondence, periodicals, maps, photographs, all the sources. And if you're lucky, someone has written a really good nonfiction book on your subject. So in the case of The Woman with the Blue Star, there was a book called In the Sewers of Lviv. And then in the case of Codename Sapphire, there's a great book called The 20th Train. So
Yeah, you reference that in, I think, the author's note.
I give
Um,
full credit to the source books. Absolutely.
yeah. And I think that that's important because, we see fiction so often be a bridge to people who want to learn about
Yeah.
the actual real history.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very, very important thing.
So there was a piece, I have to say, with the one with the blue star, I moved the story from Lviv to Krakow for various reasons. And in Lviv, it takes place in this very large sewer, and we had all these maps. I bring the story to Krakow, and has anyone been to Krakow? It's bisected by a river. So you've got like the city center on the north, and you got the ghetto where they would have been in the south. I had a sewer expert from Poland, from Krakow. We couldn't work out, whether you would go underneath, whether you could go underneath. And so I couldn't make that leap. And so every time the people like had to cross, they had to come up and cross. They couldn't
Oh,
go
cool.
under. So, yes.
How did you find a sewer expert, by the way?
When I was supposed to go to Poland, I reached out to the people in the consulate who are still amazing, who work there, the local employees who I still know, and they hooked me up with many people who I was supposed to see in person. And when my trip got canceled, they actually pivoted those meetings to virtual for me, which is amazing because their own city was shutting down and we were all not well versed in Zoom at that point. So.
Right, right. So, wow. Is it hard? Okay, so we're talking about Zoom. Is it hard to live in this very high-tech world where you can Zoom with someone in Poland and work out the sewers, but you're writing about a time before the tech? Is there like, are you used to it by now? Is there a disconnect between, oh, I wish I could give them a cell phone or
Well, anytime you're having someone solve a mystery, like they can't just hop on a plane or necessarily even on a phone, depending where they are. So that's very tricky, is figuring out what resources would be available. I think, and making sure that we empower women in our stories in ways that are true to the era, which is not the tech question, but is kind of a related challenge. And honestly, I don't write modern books, but I have a treasure trove of ideas that would just never fly in the 1940s, that I'm not writing. But I'm not super technological, so it's okay for, it's not like I'm so dependent that, and I love Zoom. I love what we've been able to do with all of this. And let's just talk about writers for a second, because we all kind of had this network of connections, and some of us knew each other before the pandemic. And the way that authors and readers and book influencers and librarians and booksellers and journalists, the way we all came together to sustain that community when we couldn't be in person was just really very special.
yeah. Oh yeah, it absolutely was. I don't know if you're like a bunch of writers I know, we were all doing write-ins on Zoom where you would just check in and your computer would sit there,
Yeah.
you'd have the little Zoom window and everyone would have their cameras off and
Writers
you just write
workshop,
quickly.
right? You do your writers workshop online. That is very cool. And there are still some subgroups of authors who we jump on Zoom like every few months. As I'm saying this, I'm going, did I miss a Zoom? I'm like, try. Do you know that moment when you're like, I'm like, did I miss a writer Zoom? But I don't think I did actually. But there's several groups of us, whether we share a genre, whether we share a publisher, whether we're at the same stage in our career, that we will like jump on Zoom and talk about what's going on.
Yeah, I have some editors I do the same thing with
Yeah.
that we just jump on and chat. Um, Robin, I'm trying to find your message. There it is. I'm looking in the wrong spot. Okay, we have a question from the group.
Yes.
The
Can you read?
Lost Girls of Paris was my
Yes.
favorite so far of yours, and I read it twice. Could you talk about that one? I might read it a third time.
I will do my very best to remember The Lost Girls of Paris. Yes. So The Lost Girls of Paris was inspired by the true story of the women who served Britain's special operations executive at a really dark moment in World War II. Churchill decided to send women over to engage in sabotage and subversion, because there weren't that many men in the streets of Europe, so men were going to stick out. So they sent women over as these agents, and they were couriers, they were saboteurs, they were radio operators, and they were really good at it. And what happened is they actually became too good because the networks got big and they got compromised. And so the Germans were able to infiltrate the networks, and the whole thing kind of collapsed like a house of cards. And so many of the women were arrested. More than a dozen never came home. They kind of disappeared without a trace. And so Lost Girls of Paris looks at that history through three lenses. One of the women who went over for SOS, the spy handler in London who was inspired by the real life Vera Atkins. In my book, she's named Eleanor Trigg, who tries to find out like not just what happened to the girls, but why. And then a woman in New York, Grace Healy, who finds a suitcase with the pictures of the girls in them, and sets out to kind of figure out what happened. So that is The Lost Girls of Paris.
Now you have almost a similar thing going on in Sapphire with Micheline.
with the
Um,
three women.
yeah, well, with the three women, yeah. But because Micheline, is it a spoiler to say what she does?
No, it's fine. But Michelin runs the Sapphire line, which is this network getting the Allied airmen out of Europe. I view Michelin. What's really interesting is when you start looking at what people did in the war, it's really different. Like the intelligence gathering people were different than the saboteurs, were different than the Michelins, because what Michelin was doing was she was helping the downed Allied airmen escape. And what happened was, I researched the train, and the train was from Belgium. So I set this story in Belgium. Well, let me tell you, you can't get far into Belgium without learning about the escape lines because they were such a huge part of the history. So the way that these escape lines operated was not just the young, brave people like Michelin, but ordinary people. You needed safe houses, drop boxes, money, food, papers, everything you can imagine. And so these brave local people. So I view it as a different sort of role than Lost Girls, but very, very important.
Okay. And while we're talking strong women, this is a hallmark for you.
Yeah, so you know what I love? You take these women who, through normal history, would have walked a very set path, and then the war happens, and they're like thrown off that path, and they're tested and they're challenged in ways that they never could have imagined. And I love seeing how those women grow and respond to the challenge. But what I also really love is seeing these women from very different backgrounds who, through normal circumstances, never would have met. And they are transcending their differences to help one another survive. And I think that's so important to realize in today's world where everything is so fractured. If we can see people and empathize with people who are overcoming their differences, I hope that it will reduce some of the otherness that we're all feeling these days.
Wow. Yes. I mean, like, you kind of nail that right on.
Thank you.
Um,
Do you want to see if anyone has questions? I love your questions. I'm just wondering if any people want to
thanks.
jump in.
Yeah. Does anyone have, I mean,
If
put it
not,
in the
Susan and I
chat.
are just going to keep talking.
Yeah.
So fun.
Hi,
I just
Robin.
wanted to ask a follow-up question about the Lost Girls. I'm sorry to go back to that.
That's great.
Um, I mean, that really interested me because I really like books that are unraveling a mystery from the past. And so I really liked the going back and forth in time. But there was also a movie made on this group of women recently. So I was wondering if that preceded your work or came after your work, and did they have any discussion with you? What was that all about?
So what's funny? Every time there's something on TV or in the movies that have to do with these women from SOS, my mom will call me. She'll say, "They took your story." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "It's not my story. It's actually history." And
Yeah.
lots of people write about it. And when you look at this particular story, the Vera Atkins story, there's been so much written about it, even in a nonfiction context, that some things you can't research, but some things there's too much. It's like a fire hydrant of material, and you have to stop and say, "Okay, I'm going to write this." So I have not seen this particular, movie or film or anything of that nature. But I know there's lots that has been done with these stories. A lot since I did it. I've seen a lot come out, but it might have been there beforehand and I just didn't know about it. So, yes. And
Thank you.
if you like mysteries, my next book, story set during the war, story set after the war, and a mysterious object that connects the two. I'm trying to I'm bending time to finish the revisions by Sunday, and it should be out next February. I don't know the name yet because they always change the title.
I look
I
forward
was
to
going to
that.
ask you about that.
Ask.
Are we looking at another dual timeline book?
It is a dual timeline book.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a 1953-ish to during the war-ish kind of book.
Okay. That's kind of what I intuited reading that description of a story during the war, a story after the war, and
Yeah.
then the mysterious object.
Yeah.
Yep, I had that written down. I was like, dual timeline?
Excellent.
Okay, so does anyone have other questions? Danny, go.
So the first, I could ask 15, but I'll start with one. So just sort of on what we were talking about these strong female protagonists, I was really interested specific in Codename Sapphire about the inclusion of this like love triangle subplot. And I'm interested in like what decisions you made to include like this love subplot without overshadowing the like three very strong main protagonists.
So it's interesting, right? That's fictitious, right? Because the characters are fictitious, and so is the relationship. So you start a book, like I'm a pantser still, and so I start a book, and I know I've got two women, right? Let's start. I start with Hannah and Lily, and I know one is going to be native Belgian. She's a citizen. She's not feeling the war, and the other one's going to be this very deeply invested partisan. And I actually wasn't sure if they were going to be sisters or cousins. They wound up cousins, and they hadn't seen each other in years. So that much I know. And then, Micheline comes in later with the escape line, but part of the dynamic between these two cousins is the love triangle. For me, that comes organically because these are young women living their lives and they have pasts and they have presents and they have futures. And so these are the kinds of things that would happen even during the wartime. Going back to Lost Girls of Paris, like it was true that some of these agents out in the field, they were like entangled with male and female agents. And one of the theories of betrayal with one of the stories is that a local woman was jealous, and that's how it all fell apart. So these things were really happening.
How strongly do you wind up connecting to your characters as you're writing them? Like, do they become real people to you?
I'm not one of the, I'm gonna say something. I'm very practical. I'm kind of more, let me give you an example. I'm kind of more of like a, my background is the law, so I don't think I'm inherently super like artsy, right? So, for example, I don't believe in writer's block because when I was a lawyer, if I had said I'm not motivated to write a brief, I'm not inspired, I would have lost my job. So I think there's like a very business-like aspect to all of this. And so there are times I've gotten deeply vested. Once I was so busy thinking about a story, I tripped over the toilet. And we all know the toilet's not in the middle of the room, right? So I do get very lost in the story. And then the diplomat's wife, when she said it's my turn, like she popped up. Well, my characters don't normally talk to me. So it happens. But it's not, so I'm very invested and I'm like, they're with me all the time. You're walking the dog or you're doing something else and it's kind of like fallowing, right? Where it's in the back of your mind and you're figuring stuff out. But I don't miss them when they're gone. I think they're like by the end of a book, they are like grumpy teenagers, right? You miss them, but um, and so, or I imagine my kids are younger, but I'm just saying I don't miss them like that. In fact, the funny thing is you have a new idea, right? You see a new idea over there, and that's like a shiny new toy in the corner. You can't play with a new toy till you clean up the mess in front of you. So I'm invested, but I'll be pretty excited when I turn the book in on Sunday. I have to be honest.
I bet. And then do you have the next one, the seeds of the next one already?
I don't. I write every single day. And so I will like finish one book and start the next book. But for me, the book has to be like truly in the can before I can go on to the next one. So I need to know that other than copy editing, it's not coming back to me for more revisions before I can get deeply into the next one. I actually really want to get deeply into the next one because spring to summer is a great writing season for me after my semester ends. So I want to be deeply working hard. But there's only so much I can do until the book is done.
Okay. Does anyone have other questions? If not, Pam said that we should give her time to talk about the times she has gone fangirl over other authors.
Yeah, so I love other authors. First, I have to say the authors today are so generous. There's so many enormous, prominent, successful authors who give so much support to all of us on the way up. And if I start naming them, I'm going to leave people out. But everyone from Kristen Hanna to Jodi Picoult to Mary Kay Andrews to Christina Baker Klein and so on and so on. It's just like a very supportive mentoring kind of system. And it's really amazing. So I love seeing authors. I have a particular fondness for children's authors and young adult authors. I have to admit, because that was like my favorite era. I don't write it, I don't have the voice for it, but I love that. And so my two stories I'm going to tell you have nothing to do with adult authors, but I was in Key West with my family about 5 years ago. Judy Bloom owns the bookstore in Key West. If you're there, go. And I heard she might be there on a Sunday. So we went down to the bookstore and she was standing there. And I lost my mind, right? Absolutely. And, oh my God, this is better than when the Eagles won the Super Bowl. And I'm telling my kids and all the stuff is going on. And she was so amazing. And she said, so first of all, I had a fan email. I had written her 20 years ago and it was 20 years to the day. And she had written back to me. So I'm like, look. And then she said, well, come here on book tour and you'll stay at my house. And so yeah, I did, and it was really amazing. So Judy Blume is like the end all be all for me, and she knows that. The other one, less sophisticated for me from my response, but even worse, is I don't know if any of you had kids who read Sweet Valley High. They were written by a woman named Francine Pascal. I was at a very swanky New York literary thing, and someone said, "Isn't that Francine Pascal, creator of Sweet Valley High?" And I ran up to this woman who then had a B, I think in her 80s. I'm like, "Oh my God, I love your books, and I have twins." And, and she was quite taken aback. So I'm never cool when I meet authors, especially children's authors. So, yes. So,
I'm sorry, I'm laughing too hard to speak. So
that's okay. It's true. It's true. And yeah, so I am, if I lived in your neck of the woods, I'm in South Jersey, but if I lived in your neck of the woods, you would see me in the JCC, right? Or Wegmans or something. But the funniest is, I could stand in the middle of Barnes and Noble and I could hold up a sign with my name on it. Most people don't know who I am, but if I am naked in the JCC locker room, that is someone's going to come up and go, "Aren't you?"
yes. Right.
That's like my one moment is the JCC, which I think is the last shtetl. So anyhow, is there anything else I can tell you?
Well, first, did your kids read Judy Blume?
Yes, especially after we were there and we bought everything in the store so she could autograph it. But yes, they had read it before then as well. And
Okay.
yeah, so she's still very relevant, very popular. Yes.
That's what I thought. My daughter refused. She was like, "I don't want to read that, Mom." And
No,
never is.
she's still the standard bearer, I think.
Yeah. Does anyone in the audience have other questions? We only have about 10 minutes left.
While we're looking for questions, I just wanted to add a couple things. First of all, I invite each and every one of you to find me wherever you're hanging out online, whether that is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email. I don't really post much. I post about books and about my dog Scoop, who is sleeping over there. So I don't really say too much else. But I'd love to stay in touch with you. The other thing is, if you should ever need autograph books, because I'm not there in person, I wanted to tell you there's a bookstore called Inkwood and they're in Haddonfield, New Jersey. And if you call them and you're like, "I need Pam's book and I need it autographed to so and so," they will tell me. I will stop there on my way home from the grocery store and autograph your books, and they mail them out. So if you ever need books, keep that in mind. They're a local independent bookstore. I love to support them.
Yes, indies are important. Okay, so we have two other questions pop up. Question one, what are you reading right now?
Ooh, well, I'm not reading anything till I'm done the revisions on Sunday, but let me tell you more like how I read. So I I'm a voracious reader. I'm a huge library person. I use 5 library systems on a regular basis. I read in fits and spurts, like a lot, and then nothing. I read a lot in my car in the pickup line for children. There's your cat. You were right. And so I read all the genres. I read like suspense. There's a really good book coming out from Mary Kubica called She's Not Sorry, if you're like a suspense person. If you're looking for someone you haven't read in historical fiction, have you read Ron Balson? I love Ron. He's very good. My mom loves his books. His research is great, and he's the closest I would get to spending time with my dad if my dad was still here. So Ron Balson is amazing. I'm just
How do you
naming a
spell
few.
that?
Balson. He's often on
Okay.
the Jewish Book Council circuit, and he's got a new book out in September, so I suspect he will be. I'm missing so many people when I name names. The last one I wanted to tell you is there's a wonderful book called When Franny Stands Up by Eden Robbins, and she's a debut author, and it's like a marvelous Mrs. Maisel, but with kind of an LGBTQ element to it. She's very good.
Ooh, I'm there. Okay, one more question. Robin, would you like to see any of your works become films?
Such a good question. So I am going to say years ago, I would have told you From Your Mouth to God's Ears, but there's actually one. So Lost Girls of Paris is optioned. It's presently optioned for it like a TV series or something like that. I don't really know that much about it. I don't know what will happen, but I can tell you that I might be Zooming with the screenwriter who's simply brilliant this week. So maybe I'll find out more, but I usually don't know much about this, but there is one right now.
Ooh,
So
nice. Is this your first?
yes, first and only.
Oh, wow.
Well, keep us posted. I
I
would love to
promise.
hear about it.
I will shout. I will shout. Follow me online. I promise to shout as soon as I have something to shout.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Okay, 8 minutes left. Last minute for questions. You can just unmute and ask if you would like.
When you go back to Poland next, what do you want to do there?
I want to see a few people. There's still a few survivors. I mean, a few of my very closest survivors passed away, but they were 100 years old. Like they had really great lives. But there are a few people there, elderly, who are still there. So I want to go. I want to go for Shabbat. I want to go to synagogue and I want to go for Shabbat, maybe visit the new Krakow JCC, which I have not been there to see, which is not so new anymore, but very exciting. See people, walk, that kind of
Where
thing.
did where did your family come from before coming to the US?
They were all from Eastern Europe, not necessarily Polish, and all were out before the Holocaust. So I didn't lose family. Although my grandmother grew up in China, which is something I wrote about in Grand Central in my short story. So when I was in Poland, I'd always try and travel places east, like Ukraine, Belarus, to find those family places. But there were no guidebooks for that sort of place back then, so it was tough.
Right. Okay. Before we sign off, I know we have a couple of our librarians here. I want to remind everyone, this is the Temple's copy of Codename Sapphire, so I will bring it back next time I am at the Temple. So if you want to borrow it, it will soon appear. Susan or Anita, what other of Pam's books do we have in the Temple library? Do you know offhand? You're muted.
I don't know offhand. Sorry.
Oh,
But shameless plug on behalf of our author here, we have a really great independent bookstore called Riverstone right in Squirrel Hill down from the Temple, and I'm sure that they have a lot of her books and you can pick up a copy.
Thank
they
you,
can
and
order
I'll come
them.
there next time on tour.
Yeah,
Very good.
I would love that. I mean, you're free to come stay with me. Yeah, Riverstone is wonderful. And then for any of you who like to shop online, bookshop.org is
Indies.
connected to indie bookstores. So your money isn't going to Amazon, it's not going to Barnes and Noble, it is going to the mom and pop bookstores. And so if you want to buy books, if you want an autographed book from Pam, get in touch with Inkwood Books directly in Jersey. Otherwise, we recommend bookshop.org, and that keeps your mom and pop bookstores like Riverstone down the street from Temple in business. And that is my ad for the evening.
Amazing. So I'm going to go pick up my children from BBYO. Last night it would have
Yes.
been Hebrew High, but I'm going to blow kisses and say thank you. And I hope to see you in person very soon.
Wait. We have The Diplomat's Wife and The Woman with the Blue Star as well
There we go.
at the
Thank
Falk
you.
Library. You can
Thank
come
you
in and
so
check it out.
much.
I hope to see you soon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank
This
you.
was
Thank you so
fun.
much.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.